The Canadian progressive rock icons Rush will be receiving this honor tonight, being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, Neil Peart. To talk about Rush, we're joined now by Durrell Bowman. He is co-editor of the book Rush and Philosophy, Heart and Mind United. Good morning, Durrell.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing well, thank you. Now, Rush seems to be one of those bands that, you either love or you hate.
That's definitely true. Reaction.
Or, you know what? Or you're in between. I've never been a fan per se, but I think they're incredible musicians. I just can't take my eyes off of them sometimes, and I'm air drumming along with Neil Peart all the time. But for those who aren't as familiar as you are, tell us a little bit of their history.
Yeah, well, they began as high school buddies who became rock musicians in the 60s in Toronto and turned pro in the 70s. They were initially doing a kind of heavy blues rock style, boogie blues, that sort of thing. Got into progressive rock, especially when Neil Peart joined the group in 74. So that got into sort of lengthier songs, more complex instrumentals and things like that. I call their music of the early 80s, like Tom Sawyer that used as the intro, kind of user-friendly progressive rock. More concise songs and so forth. But certainly they were interested in technology in the 80s as well, synthesizers, samplers, electronic percussion, but then moved away from that in the 90s back to a more kind of alternative, stripped-down kind of power trio sound again, and stayed more or less there into the 2000s, although they've used a lot of sort of texturally interesting sounds within their music in the last decade or so as well. And they've sold 45 million records, and toured just ridiculously extensively for decades as well. So
yeah,
that's the overview of the band, basically.
Is there a typical Rush fan?
Well, the stereotype, of course, is, white male musician of some type, maybe in his 40s, given that the band's been around for that long on average. But I did quite a lot of fan survey research for my dissertation on the subject, and found that of the hardcore fans, the really intense fans, about 22% actually are women. There's also teens, younger people, older people, working class people, upper middle class, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, Aboriginals, all across the board.
Runs the gamut.
It's a little unfortunate that it's sort of white male musician pigeonholed, but there's some truth to that, I guess. But the band has delved into a lot of different styles and folded them into what it does. So I think that's resonated for a lot of people.
Yeah, so when they were finally inducted into the Hall of Fame, even though they've been eligible for 15 years, Geddy Lee even said he was happy, and he was actually relieved for their fans because they take it so hard.
Fans and his mom. Yeah. So it had been a long time coming. I mean, the change that happened this past year was that fan voting became much more of a central part of the rock induction process. When the induction process was basically run by the insiders of rock criticism, there's people like David Wild, who is one of the Rolling Stone senior editors and one of the main people at the Rock Hall. He said in 2000, shortly after Rush was first eligible, it ain't ever going to happen. He said that most of Rush's music gave him a headache and that Rush would just never be inducted. So things have changed a little bit. I think there's younger critics that grew up with the band's music, or like yourself, were never fans maybe, but respected them as musicians and liked some songs along the way or whatever. So I think there's been a kind of sea change in that respect. And also just the idea that a more democratic sort of, internet, blog, Twitter, Facebook sort of world where people can express their opinions on things, and it seems more democratic to me that fans would actually have a say in these sorts of inductions.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens next year. Maybe they'll retract from the whole thing, and no one like Rush will ever be inducted again. It's quite possible.
Well, I was just going to ask you what it might mean for other bands like Yes and Deep Purple.
Yeah, sure. There are some progressive rock and earlier important rock bands that have been overlooked as well. So that's quite possible. Those bands haven't been sort of as consistently active over the decades. I mean, Yes, it still has been around in different configurations over the years. So it may have worked out in Rush's favor that they just had such a large following that stayed with them. So that may have affected that. But certainly there are other bands. I mean, Heart was also inducted this year, and I don't think any rock critics saw that coming either. So although the rest of them seem to be more in line with what the rock critic establishment would have probably gone along with without fan voting.
Durrell, thanks very much for speaking with us this morning.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Durrell Bowman is co-editor of the book Rush and Philosophy, Heart and Mind United. He was on the line from Waterloo.